Hello everyone. I thought the best way to make use of the time or the makeup assignment that we missed for Monday's 30 minutes of class was to kind of go over the outline of the final exam so that tomorrow during class we can reserve that time to kind of work through some problems and I can answer any questions you guys may have had as you work through the final exam review. So I'm just going to walk you through this outline. The final exam is 10 questions long. You'll get the same formula sheet that you've used all semester, and you'll have 55 minutes to complete the exam. So just going over some major topics that we covered this semester. And yes, we have learned a lot. One of the major things that we hope you got from Math 171 is that you're able to solve the different equations and inequalities we encountered this semester. So one of those is linear equations, and I have some examples written down here. 3x minus 5 equals 2, where you add 5 to both sides and then divide by 3 to get your solution for x. And then the other is an inequality, and the thing that you solve that the same way. You just remember that when you're solving an inequality and you have to divide by negative or multiply by a negative to get the solution, you have to remember to flip that inequality symbol. We also came across absolute value equations and inequalities. And the thing I want you to remember about those is most of those have two cases, right? So if you have something like the absolute value of 3x is equal to 5, you split that up into two cases because 3x can either equal 5 or negative 5 to give you the solution. Same with an inequality, it's just a little more involved. So if the inequality is greater than, like it is here, then you set up two different cases, and the combination is an or. So either 3x is greater than 5 or 3x is less than negative 5. And if the inequality is a less than symbol, then that becomes an and. So 3x is either less than 5 or it's greater than negative 5. Then we encountered quadratic equations. The two major ways we learned how to solve those were by factoring or using the quadratic formula. For both of those methods, you need to get the quadratic set equal to 0. Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to get my pen working again. So then we also solve quadratic inequalities. We learned two methods with that. You can either make a rough graph of the inequality of the quadratic parabola and see where the parabola is above or below the x-axis, or you can use test intervals. All right, with either of those, you've got to find the critical values and then figure out the interval for which those solutions live. Then we had higher degree polynomials, so something like f of x is equal to x to the fourth plus 3x squared minus 2x plus 1. Remember to solve those. The possible rational zeros test would help us identify those possible zeros. And then we could use the graph that I'm going to provide and synthetic division to get that quadratic or get that polynomial down to a quadratic, and then you can solve it using one of the methods mentioned above. We also had systems of equations. We learned how to solve that by using either substitution, elimination, or graphing, so you'll need to review that. And then we had the rational inequalities where you actually set that big box up, again, find the critical values, and you set the box up to test intervals to see where the solutions live in which intervals. The last two types of equations we learned how to solve were exponential and logarithmic. With exponential, you may be faced with like bases on either side of the equals. In that case, you can set the exponents equal to each other. Or if you don't have like bases, then you end up taking the log of both sides to get that variable out of the exponent. In either case, the first thing you need to do is isolate the exponential. And then finally, the last type of equation that we learned how to solve were logarithmic. Again, you want to condense both sides to get it down to a single log. And the cases you have are either log equals log, and in that case, you set the arguments equal to each other. Or you have log equals a number, and in that case, you want to change it to exponential form. When you're solving equations or inequalities, remember that it's always a good idea, if time allows, to check your answers to make sure your answers are correct. But with logarithmic functions, you must check because sometimes those values don't work because the domain of logarithms is limited. All right, so then the next major topic that we studied in Math 171 was all about functions. So the first major concept that we hope that you grasp in 171 is how to find the domain of different functions. And by the end of the semester, we had 3 functions that had limited domains: rational, or in other words, fractional. And remember, with those, you set the denominator not equal to 0. We also had radicals, and of course, we're assuming those are even root radicals because odd root radicals don't have a limited domain. And in that case, you set what's under the radical, or we learned that's called the radicand, greater than or equal to 0. And then finally, at the end of the semester, we learned the last type of function that had a limited domain, and that's a logarithmic function. And in that case, you set the argument just greater than 0. And then the functions that do not have a limited domain, absolute value, polynomials, and those could be linear, quadratic, or higher degree. And then finally, the last function we were introduced to was exponential. So all of these functions, as long as they aren't combined with anything above that has a limited domain, these would be all real numbers. So I'm going to stop there because there is a part 2 for the rest of this sheet. So you'll want to watch both videos to make sure you get a good review of everything we've covered. Of course, I can't reteach everything we've learned, so I'm just trying to point out the highlights and let you know the things that you need to go back and review, and try to remind you of some of those things that you need to look out for, like limited domains, how to solve the different types of equations, flipping the inequality symbols, solving inequalities, and those types of things. So please watch both part 1 and part 2, and we'll see you in class. I'm hoping you come to class with some questions after working through the entire final exam review, and we'll just kind of answer those questions and hopefully maybe give you a few more problems to practice. All right, we'll see you in class tomorrow.